Nearly 3 years of war, the threat of famine, and now a devastating cholera outbreak. Millions of people in Yemen are struggling to survive. So who's to blame for this? And is the Saudi-imposed blockade complicating aid efforts? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jane Dutton. The world's worst humanitarian disaster. That's how the United Nations is describing the unprecedented cholera outbreak in Yemen. The disease is killing at least one person almost every hour. And that's already on top of the devastating effects of the nearly 3-year war between the government and Houthi rebels. The Saudi-led coalition has closed the main airport and prevented many human rights workers from entering the country. A military alliance of Arab states, led by Saudi Arabia, is fighting in support of the government. The UN says the number of suspected cases of cholera continues to rise. More than 130,000 people have fallen ill since the outbreak began in April. Almost 1,000 people have died, with women and children accounting for half of those numbers.
None of the politicians involved in this ever speak of or ever remind themselves of the humanitarian tragedy. And you never hear them mentioning that as part of the dialogue. And until that changes, then I think the political stalemate will continue.
It's almost 2 months into the second cholera outbreak in less than a year in Yemen, with at least one patient checking into Sanaa's Sabayin hospital every 60 seconds. People say the streets are full of rubbish, which helps the spread of the disease.
I contracted cholera after going to the Al Safia area. The neighbourhood was full of rubbish and sewage. I was in hospital for 4 days. The situation in the hospital was terrible. There were many cases of cholera.
There were deaths caused by cholera in my neighbourhood. About 5 people died. We tried to raise awareness among the people on how to clean vegetables and food with chlorine water before cooking them.
Garbage causes the disease of cholera. If we cleaned our streets and our markets and inside our houses, this disease would not break out and we would all be well.
Well, let's bring in our guest. Joining us here in Doha is Ibrahim Frehat, Professor of Conflict Resolution at the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies and author of the book Unfinished Revolutions, Yemen, Libya and Tunisia After the Arab Spring. In Sana'a, joining us on Skype, Shabia Mantu, spokeswoman for the UNHCR in Yemen. And also in Sana'a, but on the line, is the Hussein Al-Pagheti, a Yemeni journalist, as I said, based in the capital. Welcome to all of you. I'm going to start off with you, Ibrahim Frehat, and firstly talk about the politics surrounding this cholera outbreak. What is it?
Well, I think this has come as a result, at least in one way, as a result of the blockade that's been imposed on Yemen for the past 2 years. And that the civil war in Yemen has contributed directly to this. So we're seeing the outbreak of cholera in Sana'a, which hasn't been the case before this whole war started. And I think there are, to answer your question of what you started with, actually, is that everyone is to blame here. There is everyone contributed in his or her own way to the outbreak of cholera, whether it's the authorities that are in control of Sana'a or the countries that are imposing the blockade. Unfortunately, we're seeing the victims of this blockade and the war in Yemen are the victims, the people. The people are paying the highest price. They're suffering as a result of this. And what the parties in charge seem to be only caring about is their political positions. So we have cholera on the ground, and the politicians are arguing about the negotiations and about the gains and about the Security Council resolutions 2216 and who's in charge of what. So while the politics on the political level is running and continuing on the arguments, and as we also know that the UN envoy was subjected to an assassination attempt in the past 2 months, while the people are suffering and no one seems to really contribute to the lessening of the suffering or removal of the suffering of the people.
Shabia Mantu, I mean, you must wonder, how many people need to die in this conflict before it comes to an end, and the politics that surround it would just exacerbate the situation. Tell us what it is that you're seeing.
Well, that's exactly right. You mentioned earlier that this is an unprecedented cholera crisis. It's actually an unprecedented humanitarian crisis in Yemen. It's the largest humanitarian crisis in the world, and cholera, as bad as it is just one consequence of the conflict and also the deteriorating situation. So across Yemen, we're dealing with a myriad of consequences as a result of the conflict. We're dealing with a protection crisis in which an average of 75 people are being killed or injured every day because of the conflict. We're dealing with, as he said, with more than 150,000 suspected cholera cases. And we're dealing with the largest food security emergency in the world, in which 17 million people don't have enough food to eat. And these are just some of the problems, and it's just overwhelming. Humanitarians are also being asked to fill in the gaps to replace functioning state services, and this is well beyond the mandate and the response. So the situation is on the ground. We're seeing many more deaths, more suffering, a lot of misery, and we're seeing this because of a failure to achieve peace.
Hussein al-Bukhati, from your work on the ground and what you write about as a journalist, tell us about the politics surrounding this, the players involved, and why they're finding it so hard to put a stop to the suffering. I mean, look at those pictures. It's women and children who are mainly affected.
I think this cholera outbreak shouldn't have anything to do with politics, but it seems to be that the Saudi-led coalition are trying to have like pressure and to have the suffering on Yemeni people, so to turn against the Houthi in Sana'a. And I think that this method that the Saudi have used, they think that it will turn in their favor, but I think that this what's happening now, people in Yemen know what to blame. No, it's the Saudi war in Yemen, the Saudi blockade in Yemen is the main reason of all this famine, starvation, and now the cholera outbreak. And according to World Health Organization, it's clear. They said the main reason is because of the collapse of the health system and water and sanitation system in Yemen. And why did this collapse? It's because the Saudi constant attack and strikes on hospitals, on clinics in many areas around Yemen. They have bombed and destroyed 4 MSF clinics, one in Abs, one in Raja, and one in Saada, one mobile clinic in Taiz. They have bombed Yemeni airport, Yemeni port, which is one of the main lines to get fuel into Yemen. And fuel is the main. We need fuel to get clean water to people at home. But because it's the high price of fuel, and sometimes we have no fuel, this is the main reason of the cholera outbreak. I'm 35 years old. I haven't heard of such a thing, cholera. We used to hear it only happening in Africa and other countries, but not in Yemen. And the Saudi method to bring Yemeni into submission, I think that's why they try to make it hard for simple Yemeni to live a life and to get their living easily. I mean, if the Saudi wants to talk with the Houthi, I mean, they can talk, but especially the Saudi, they should leave Yemeni port outside of any military operations. They should leave Yemeni airport as well outside of that. And I think if they do that, then we will see things change on the ground.
Shabia, tell us how this blockade is affecting your work and what sort of impact it is having on humanitarian aid getting into the country.
Well, we're concerned by any action that does result in hindrance or obstacles into the importation of humanitarian supplies, but also food, fuel, essential items that are needed for survival. And Yemen is a country that is 90% import dependent on essential supplies. So we are concerned about the consequences on the civilian population when there are restrictions on essential imports. And we've been advocating with all parties to the conflict to ensure that really the well-being and the best interests of civilians are paramount in this conflict. And that is a challenge, but we continue to advocate for that. But what it means at the end of the day is if there are restrictions on the free importation of essential supplies, that civilian life is harder. It exacerbates the food crisis. It exacerbates the ability to get essential medicines, for fuel. So it is a very difficult situation for civilians. And they are paying the highest price in this conflict, and they're the ones that are suffering disproportionately.
Ibrahim, the role of this blockade, what's it going to serve? Who will it serve? And what do you think the end game is of the blockade?
Okay, well, I will have first to disagree with my colleague from Sana'a that only blaming one party for this. I think the blockade has contributed to this crisis, whether it's by the prevention of arrival of aids or all other types of supplies, or by the direct bombing of some institutions or some places there. But that's not the only reason. That's not the only cause that is causing this cholera. The Houthis who are in control in Sana'a, they should also take responsibility for their actions.
They've also been accused of atrocities.
They are started this coup, and they became in power, and they became in control of state institutions. So this, to be in control of the city, this comes with a responsibility. You should take responsibility for what you're doing. Now, we've seen actually like direct causes of this cholera, which is the trash in the streets, the garbage in the streets, and so such examples or such causes, direct causes to the outbreak of cholera, is not responsible about the bombing or the blockade. You have Houthis who are in control, and with control comes governance. They have to show that they're able to do good governance and take care of the population, that they are exercising their control and their sovereignty over that city.
That has not been the case. I guess
that has not been the case, and we're seeing the spread of trash and garbage and everything in the street. That's contributing to the outbreak of cholera, and they should take responsibility for this, not only blame one party, because I think everyone has contributed to this. Now, where this is heading and the end game of this, I think the politicians on all sides, they have to realize that they don't have to wait for millions of people to die, because now we're talking about, according to the World Health Organizations, over 100,000 cases of suspected cholera in Yemen. They shouldn't wait until 1 million, the number reaches 1 million. And this is very alarming of what's happening now. And we have not seen any serious actions that have been taken on any side in order to fight cholera or prevent this. And I think the end game, to answer your question, would be very disastrous if the parties don't realize that they have responsibility, and each party has to exercise its responsibility and take care of its share to prevent this outbreak.
Okay, let's put that to Hussein. What are the Houthis doing? What role are they playing in ending this and taking their responsibility in the capital Sana'a and in the surrounding areas because of this ongoing conflict?
Yeah, I'm really surprised that your guest, has said Houthis, I think, over maybe 70 or 50 times. Of course the Houthis have responsibility, and anyone who is controlling Sana'a have responsibility towards the people. But what can you do? What can you do if the Saudi are bombing your hospital? What can you do if the Saudi are bombing the market? What can you do if the Saudi have bombed?
Maybe they shouldn't have taken over Sana'a in the first place. But maybe they shouldn't have taken over Sana'a in the first place. This exacerbated the situation.
Look, this is what's happening in Yemen is an internal matter. Have you heard any coalition on a country because of a coup? Why only in Yemen? Why in Egypt? There was a coup in Egypt. Why they haven't intervened? They have brought Egypt to be a part of their coalition. So,
okay, I'm just wondering what the Houthis expected when they. I'm just wondering what the Houthis expected when they took this action. What is it that they were hoping for?
Look, the Houthis, when they took power on 21st of September 2014, still for 6 months, everything got better. We got more water was running more, and we got electricity like power on more hours. and there was more security. And as well as you see now, if we look what responsibility the Houthi do, the Houthi can take, for example, the security responsibility, which they do really great. They are better than the so-called area that they have liberated, like in Aden. But about humanitarian situation, I mean, 90% of Yemen food and meat is imported from outside. And the fuel is on the hands of the Saudi-led coalition in Yemen. So now they have to buy everything. And you have the airport is closed, the port, you hardly can get anything inside. The hospital, what do you want? To take people and to take care of them, is bombs.
Okay, Hassan, I'm just going to interrupt you there. I do want to take a closer look at life in Yemen since the start of this war. 3 million people have fled from their homes, and the situation has been described as a humanitarian catastrophe, as all my guests were saying. An estimated 18.8 million people are relying entirely on aid. The World Bank says 17 million Yemenis aren't getting enough food. And since the escalation of the conflict in March 2015, health facilities across Yemen have reported more than 8,000 deaths. I mean, Shabi, I don't even know how you deal with a situation like this. I mean, where do you, if you can't stop the politics at play, if you can't stop the fighting, what is needed in order to stop cholera? Because I believe cholera can be stopped.
Well, what's needed to stop the humanitarian consequences from spiralling further, and what's needed to save lives immediately, is definitely more support for the humanitarian response. Now, we are calling upon the international community to really come forward and help achieve more support to respond to the needs in Yemen. We are dealing with the world's worst and largest emergency in terms of numbers, and people are really dying not only as a result of the conflict directly, but also because of these preventable consequences such as cholera. So more support is needed. At the same time, peace is definitely needed. That's the only solution to Yemen. That's what Yemen needs. That's what's going to halt further suffering. It's going to stop needs from spiraling. We're 3 years into the conflict. We have, as you mentioned, more than 3 million people that have been uprooted from their homes. They're living in very deteriorating conditions that are also conducive to the spread of cholera and other communicable diseases. So what's needed really is some urgent redress, a boost for the humanitarian response plan for Yemen, and at the same time, really robust efforts to seek peace between the parties.
Okay,
because that's the only thing that's...
Why has the international community been so slow to respond here? I mean, tell me from a humanitarian point of view, is it because there's some sort of fatigue happening in the world? So many wars everywhere? I mean, why is it so hard to get involved in this country, which has been on the brink for decades?
Well, it has been on the brink for a while, but it's never experienced a crisis like this. And there are a multitude of reasons. It definitely is overshadowed by other regional crises. But at the same time, honestly, it's a question we as humanitarians, we wake up every morning and we don't understand what more does Yemen need to face and suffer for people to start to wake up and realize the gravity of the situation. It really is the world's largest humanitarian crisis, but it's among the world's most neglected. So it's a question that we ask the world every day. What will it take people to start caring about what's happening in Yemen? People are really suffering in silence, and their suffering is really abysmal.
Ibrahim, let's talk a little bit about the politics. I mean, there is no discussions underway, nothing's happening on the political front. You've got the UK, France and the US providing arms and intelligence to the Saudi forces. The Houthis are backed by Iranian forces, though we don't know the extent there. I mean, what's going to drive all of these players to the table, and what sort of concessions need to be made?
Well, I think, unfortunately, we have a stalemate at the moment. And this, for the past, actually, almost 2 years, nothing new has happened. It's just constant bombing, that the bombing is not taking us anywhere. And militarily, there's no military solution for this. Saudi Arabia has to realize that the bombing and the blockade is not achieving the results and the outcome that they wanted, to achieve in the first place. The Houthis have to realize also that their responsibility is, they have to take their responsibility as well. And to actually comment very quickly on what my colleague said from Sana'a, is hearing me that only talking about the Houthis, not hearing me out talking about the blockade causing or contributing to the causes of this. Yeah. Not sure why he didn't comment about removing the trash from the streets, how the blockade has to do with this, or the bombing has to do with this. So I think the parties, Saudi Arabia, the Saudi-led coalition, the Houthis, and Ali Abdullah Saleh, the Hadi government, they all had a great opportunity is to end this chaos and to end with a political solution. We have Security Council Resolution 2216 that actually calls for a way, for the exit, a way out of this conflict, a way out of this crisis. And we had also the Kuwait negotiations. The Kuwait negotiations presented an excellent opportunity and for the parties to present their demands and negotiate and make concessions. There is no military solutions. The Houthis have to realize that they cannot unilaterally rule in Yemen. The Saudi Arabia or the Saudi-led coalition has to realize that they cannot militarily end this conflict because this will contribute to further chaos and further problems. So until the two main parties realize their responsibilities, that there is no military solution on the Saudi side, and the Houthis have to realize that they cannot exclude others. They cannot just bring Saleh back to the scene and receive the support from Iran, the military support from Iran, and then assume that everything will be fine.
But that's what all the players want, don't they? I mean, Hussein, that's what the Houthis want as well. They want to be included in the political process, and it's probably a fair request of all parties involved, right?
Well, the Kuwait negotiations presented this opportunity. Yeah. The national dialogue outcome that led by the UN also presented this opportunity.
Okay, let's put that
to... And the Houthis also, they were signatory on the national dialogue outcomes.
Hussein, what do you think is going to bring the Houthis to the table?
I mean, I think if we see the whole negotiation process from the beginning of the war, I mean, the Houthi has been accepting. They have accepted 2216. They have accepted to go into Geneva 1, Geneva 2, and as well to go into Kuwait. It seems it's the other side, is the Saudi-led coalition that's not willing to give up. Like they asked the Houthi to withdraw from Sana'a, while Aden, they have a foreign force stationed in Aden. There is no withdrawal from Aden. So they only want, what the problem, they only want concession from the Houthi side in Sana'a, but the Saudi wouldn't want to keep anything back or anything in return. And we have seen as well with the UN latest statement, I think yesterday or the day before yesterday, they're asking for a withdrawal from Hodeida port because the Saudi coalition could not reach the port. So the UN is asking the Houthi to give concession for a military failure that the Saudi could not make. So the UN must be like, and they are actually biased. They are with the Saudi, and we've seen many UN envoy condemnation
okay, I'm going to have to cut in.
Saudi military.
Sorry, Hussein, I'm going to have to cut in here because we run out of time, and I want to pose two quick questions to my guests. Sorry, very quickly, Ibrahim, do you think the embargo on Qatar has taken the eye off the ball as well, briefly, in Yemen? Do you think that's going to delay any sort of...
Well, this we have seen actually a direct link or a direct impact on the Yemen, the Gulf crisis, on the Yemen conflict. Qatar was excluded or ended its operations in there. And then the efforts seem now to be directed or to the Gulf crisis and forgetting about Yemen, because Yemen I think has as a priority. We have over 100,000 cases. This should not be forgotten, no matter what happens in any other parts of the region, whether it's in the Gulf crisis or in other places. This is a humanitarian disaster. It should have taken priority while other crises can continue on their own.
Okay, Shabia, if this doesn't end soon, tell me what you're looking at.
Well, we're going to see many, many more preventable deaths, much more suffering. We see women and children disproportionately affected, and many more women and children are already on the streets because 3 years into the conflict, they've exhausted all their coping mechanisms. So people are turning to very dangerous strategies to try and survive. Kids are getting out of school. Lots of young girls are being married off earlier. There are a whole host of other problems, not just health problems, but we also have very limited state capacities. Less than half of health facilities are functioning. So much more suffering, much more misery, much more mortality, and more displacement. So the situation is abysmal. It's already on the brink, and we're not really sure how worse this can get.
All right, let's leave it there. Thank you very much to all three of my guests, Ibrahim Frehat here in the studio, Shabia Mantou and Hussein Al-Preti, and thank you too for watching. You can see the program anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Jane Dutton, and the whole team here, thanks for watching. Bye for now.